I'm endlessly fascinated and curious about the world around us, about business, about politics, about the arts, about culture, developments, social issues, and the people. Most importantly, about the people that are shaping our future. Every night, I get the opportunity to have conversations, to dive into conversations with thought leaders, with change makers, entrepreneurs, politicians, and everyday heroes who unpack the ideas and stories that I think matter to all of us. What's the future of our economy? What's the future of our country? How do we build stronger communities? What can we learn from music, theater, sports, politics, the arts? How does policy shape our real lives? What does leadership look like, real leadership in today's environment? If it's interesting and relevant and topical and we're talking about it, you'll hear about it here at 6 o'clock on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to have real conversations, in-depth conversations. These are ideas we're sharing. This is the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for joining me. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got a fascinating young lady who I've chatted with a few times before, Amanda Christmann Larson. She's an American who was traveling the world doing jobs remotely and had an incredibly interesting experience that we've talked about before on that. But now she spent the last couple of weeks in Ukraine and intends to stay there for a while, writing a book about the human side of war. Amanda, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Thank you. So you're in Kiev, and you've traveled around Ukraine a little bit, I understand. Why? Why are you doing this?
Well, this summer, I had the opportunity to attend a camp with Hope for Ukraine. And as we talked about before, I'm on the board for that organization. They're doing a lot of just really amazing humanitarian relief here in Ukraine. And in doing that, I met 46 kids and their coaches from a town here in Ukraine called Kryvyi Rih. And Kryvyi Rih is a kind of industrial town, but it's not far. It's only about 20 kilometers now from the front line. So in the initial incursion, they got hit pretty hard, and they regularly get hit with missiles and things. But people are still living there, and the children are going to school. People are working. They're still living regular life as much as possible. And they're just there's so much to share about the culture here and about the resilience of people and about the human side of the war. And I wanted to do that in the only way I know how, which is storytelling. So I'm writing a book about it.
20 kilometers is not that far. Like
Mm-mm.
20 kilometers is really close. How can you live a normal life 20 kilometers away from the front line? How can you go to school? How can you have a job? How can you have a family 20 kilometers from the front line?
It's really incredible. You know, I spent a lot of time. I met so many people there who took me on tours of the city and things that they thought were important. And, you know, there are places, there's a school I went to that has been struck 7 times with missiles since the war started in 2022. And every time they rebuild the roof, they, you know, put new windows in or board up the windows. And they've built underground shelters now for the kids. There's just so many things that these things happen, and they happen all over. There aren't many neighborhoods in Kryvyi Rih in particular that haven't been hit by a missile, and where there's, you know, I don't think there are any hotels that are still standing there. For example, every single hotel has been hit because typically the military stays in hotels there if they're ever stationed there. So they've just, you know, the Russians have destroyed all the hotels. But yeah, there's amazing restaurants. There's regular, you know, it's an industrial city, and you know, there's regular businesses going on, and everyone's got their own thing that they're doing. The schools have been incredible as far as adapting. Most of the schools are 70 to 80 years old, you know, built in the mid 20th century. And most of them don't have basements. So they're digging below the schools to build bomb shelters for the students, and they add classrooms to them because they're going there a couple times a week. Often sometimes it's a couple times a day when the air raid sirens go off, and the students have to go down below and they want to resume class. So they've got classrooms down there. There's kindergartens down there where they have little cots for nap time, for example. I mean, it's just people are just adapting. And I like to look at it as defiance. Every time somebody goes on with their life and doesn't stop what they're doing or succumb to fear or whatever, it's like a big middle finger to Putin, really. It's a it's a we're going to live our lives in spite of anything that you do to us. And it's kind of fantastic. People are strong and resilient and brave in ways that I can't even describe.
Give us a geography lesson if you could. So, where is this town? I presume it's to the east of Kyiv, to the east of Ukraine.
It's southeast of Kiev. Yeah, it's not too far. It's maybe I guess about an hour. I'm guessing by to drive from there to Dnipro, which Dnipro is a city that we hear a lot in the news. It's yeah, toward the south. So Kiev, if so by bus, when I went down there, it takes about 7 hours by bus to get there from Kiev. So Ukraine is actually a pretty large country, and that is pretty far. And we do have strikes that happen here in Kiev. We had, in fact, weirdly enough, I was in Kryvyi Rih last weekend, and we did not have any missile strikes last weekend, but Kiev did. So it's interesting that I was in a place that, theoretically should be a lot more dangerous. And Kiev actually had a lot more things going on last weekend than there did.
Is it safe for American to be traveling around Ukraine?
Well, it has not very little to do with being American. I wouldn't go to the front line. I think that's not safe at all. But it, everything here is safe until it's not. A friend who's here, so I'm staying with friends who I've met. My one friend in particular, I met in Thailand, and he's here doing a humanitarian mission. And he likens it to an episode of The Simpsons where Homer Simpson is looking for this alternate life. And he has dreams about these different places, and they've got these wacky scenarios. And he wakes up in this one scenario, and his kids come to him, and they're like, "Oh, hi, Dad! It's great to see you." And then Marge says, "Hey, honey, good morning. I've got breakfast on the table for you." And Homer's thinking, "This is amazing! Wow, it's just wonderful." So he sits down at the table, and he says, "Where are the donuts?" And everyone says, "Donuts? What are donuts? What are you talking about?" And then lightning strikes and they look outside and Marge says, "Oh, it's raining again." And it's raining donuts. And it's a wacky analogy, but it's so true. Everything is so normal except for it's raining donuts. And in this case, there's missiles. And here in Kiev, most of the cities, and Kiev has, I think it's 3.2 million people live here. And so to put that in perspective, last weekend's airstrikes that happened here, they hit some places. They really did. 4 people died out of 3.2 million people. And, coming from, for me, a city like St. Louis, Missouri, where we have more gun deaths than that in a week, it put it in perspective. It's not as scary as I thought it would be, and it's not, things are far, far more normal than I thought they would be.
So, when you went to this town on the southeastern part of Ukraine, near the front, 20 kilometers to the front, you visited schools, you visited people. What did you find?
It's kind of hard to really wrap it up because I hung out with people who were in different humanitarian groups. They gave me different tours. I also hung out at there's a sports school. So here, if children are especially talented in sports, they go to these sports schools. And so this one in particular has swimming, boxing, and gymnastics. And these kids are incredibly talented. Of course, the goal is the national team and maybe the Olympics. But so I was there. I went to a couple of boxing tournaments, for example, and the whole community is very supportive of it. There aren't many people who aren't very, very pro-Ukraine at this point, but they're tired. They've been in this war for over 3 years, and the original volunteers, the people who signed up right away for the military, that cycle's gone, and now a lot of they're hearing so much in the news about what the United States, what our stance has been. and it's wavered so much and gone back and forth. And that's, that's very bad for morale because people are thinking, are they going to support us or are they not going to support us? And here they are, holding their own for more than 3 years against this country. It's this is a David and Goliath fight that's been going on. And everyone also knows it's a proxy war. It's not really about Ukraine. It's Putin and NATO, and there's so many different aspects of it.
Seriously,
That
so you think it's a proxy war, Putin against NATO? You don't think it's, this desire to denazify Ukraine? It's not to create the greater Russia again. It's more about challenging NATO.
I believe it is, yeah. And a lot of people here believe it is. It was never really about Ukraine. I mean, Putin doesn't have a lot to gain here, but he does have some power to gain here, and he does talk about wanting to reunite the old Soviet Union. And when this place, to put that in perspective, this part, Kiev and Kryvyi Rih, this half of Ukraine were part of the Soviet Union until 1991. And when it was part of the Soviet Union, people really suffered. They did not have, so the resources that are here, Ukraine grows a lot of grain. And so they're kind of the food basket of things. Soviet Union doesn't have that so much. So the resources that were here, like, people they couldn't buy milk, they couldn't buy meat, they couldn't buy, so many everyday things. I was asking a friend, what a treat would have been when he was a kid. And he said, we didn't get treats. It's not like if you had some extra change, you could go down to the corner store and get a candy bar, like I did when I was a kid, because candy bars did not exist. He said that he got a Coca-Cola with his dad. He split a Coca-Cola on New Year's Eve each year. And that was a very special thing because those things just weren't available. And, that's not to mention in the 1930s, when the Soviet Union first took over this area, the Holodomor was horrendous. It killed millions of people. It was a mass starvation that the Soviets did against Ukrainians that they didn't admit until, relatively recently. But it was never kind under Soviet rule. And people didn't have the kind of freedom that they have had now. And even though Ukraine is not a perfect place, there's a lot of talk about corruption and things. It's a young country. It's a very young country when it comes down to it, as far as having their independence, because it's been part of, other countries for so long and been controlled by other countries. This is relatively new for them to have their own government and their own everything. And they're going through some growing pains, yes, but it's their growing pains and they want to have it for themselves. And so that's why freedom and independence are so important to Ukrainians. So even though it's not perfect, it's still theirs and they want to be the ones who are in control.
You've made a few trips to Ukraine, I think. Why?
Well, this is actually my second trip. The first one I went to Lviv 2 years ago now with Hope for Ukraine. And I'd gotten involved with Hope for Ukraine actually quite by chance. I met somebody, the president of the board, on a train in Munich. When we were both traveling, we were heading to the airport. It was about an hour trip, and we started talking, and we made friends, basically, kept in touch after that. And I asked him how I could contribute, and so I became a member of the board. And the first time I went to Lviv was just to see what Hope for Ukraine was doing and to kind of get a feel for what was happening here. Lviv is in the west, the northwest. It's not, although we did have there was a strike there last night. That was pretty bad, but they normally do not get hit with things like this part of the country does, and like the eastern and the north. But I went there the first time, and I think, the air raid sirens and the things that were happening, we did have a strike there while I was there. It was kind of traumatic, and it really showed me what it feels like to have air raid sirens. So that's something you and I have never grown up with. And the air raid sirens were, I can't really describe what it does to you. It just throws you because things are so not normal. And, things like there's no airplanes here. And so at night they were covering all the statues and windows of churches and things, stained glass windows of these amazing old churches. They were using sandbags to cover them in case there were blasts so that they could preserve these historic monuments and things. And when the big trucks would go over the brick streets, it sounded like an airplane going past. And so it, at night, if when I heard that, it sounded like an airplane, and it was kind of traumatic. So for months afterwards, I would have dreams that there was an airplane coming, and I was afraid because here there's no air traffic unless it's at the time there were not even Ukrainian Air Force airplanes. So unless it was a Russian MiG, and so in my mind it was like it really kind of messed with me. But I've had 2 years to process that, and it's amazing coming back now how normalized these things become relatively quickly. And we have air raid sirens relatively often. I would say at least once a day. Every now and then we'll have a day that there's not one, but it's rare. And it's okay now. I feel okay about it. I don't feel like I'm incredibly scared or, have nightmares or anything. And often, which I hate to say it, but I sleep through it just like a lot of other people here do.
You sleep through the air raid sirens. Really?
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah, because I mean it's a big place and the chances that it's going to hit you are relatively slim. And it's I don't know, it's hard to describe, but it becomes so normal. If it's so everybody checks, there's apps that you check, there's Telegram channels, and everybody checks to see is if it's a ballistic missile, because if it's a ballistic missile, we go, that's, we should get into the shelter. But if it's just a regular air raid siren, people are like, yeah,
Another
it's
one.
yeah.
Unbelievable. It's what an incredible experience. What an incredible opportunity for you to see personally what life is like at the front
Yeah.
or almost at the front in a war in Ukraine today. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in 2 minutes with Amanda Christmann Larson about her experience in Ukraine and why she's doing it and why she's writing a book about it. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be just back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Amanda Christmann Larson with me tonight. Amanda, you're a mom. I think maybe you're even a grandmother
Hmm.
from St. Louis, Missouri. What the heck are you doing in Ukraine writing a book? Like what gives?
You're not the only person asking that question. It's I'm so honored to be here. I mean, this life experience has been definitely one of the top five that I've ever experienced. And I honestly, I couldn't, meeting the Dalai Lama was up there. There's some other things, but the what I've learned about humans here and what I've learned about war and what I've learned about, like our whole purpose here and our whole, like the big picture has been so invaluable. Even though, yes, it's a war and it's horrible and there's so many horrible things that are happening, it still is something I would never trade. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here.
What's your book going to be about?
So my book is actually going to be fiction. And the reason I did that is because I can play with characters and integrate more than one person into the character. But it's fiction, but it's based on real people who I've met here, and then also on real events that have happened here. And the point is to humanize the war, because as we've discussed before, there's so many statistics out there and there's so many pictures of bombed things that are out there, but the human side of the story and why it's so important that Ukraine is in this fight and wins this fight are things that we don't hear so much. And it's the people like you and me, and it's the coaches and it's the kids and it's the parents and it's the communities and the people who are choosing to be the helpers. Like those are really big things. And there are things like here literature is such a big deal. Like people know their authors. They know if they're, for example, there's a lot of pride in Ukrainian authors and there's a lot of pushback against Russian authors at this point. But they know their authors. They know their musicians. They're classical musicians who I'm talking about. They know their poetry. They know their art, and it's those are in philosophy. Those are so integral to who people are here as Ukrainians that that's really special. When I think of my own education, I know so very little about, at least I did, about, you know, authors and art and these creative things because we focus so much on math, science, the STEM curriculum that we're losing something, I think, in the West when it comes to creativity. And if you look at historically, every single industrial revolution or big invention, science-based or math-based invention that happens, it's always preceded by a period of philosophical growth and creativity. And I think, for humanity, we have to open up our minds to be creative and be creative problem solvers in order for this other stuff to happen. But we're losing that in the West, and it's still happening so much here. And I think that had Ukraine not been so geared toward creativity that way, there's no way they could remain in this war, because the things that they've had to do, they've repurposed, old missile systems, for example. So much of the military help that they've gotten from the West has been everybody's old stores from, 50 years ago or 30 years ago. It's kind of outdated stuff that they have had to reconfigure and reuse and make work for what's happening right now against modern warfare. Ukraine is the one who has, it's kind of the testing grounds. The drones that are happening right now, Americans in particular, but nobody worldwide really knows how to fight drone warfare except Ukrainians, and they know how to do that because they've had to kind of do their R&D right here on the ground in real time to do that. And now the next thing that is the big threat is AI attached to drones. And that's already starting. The testing for that is already starting, and it's terrifying to think of that because they no longer have to be manned. Right now, the current issue with the drones is that they have to be connected to Wi-Fi, or they have to have the trying to think of the
Fiber optic.
the cable thing.
Fiber optic.
Fiber optic. Thank you. That's the word. The fiber optic cable, in order to be run, but once they're run on AI, they don't need that, and that's going to be terrifying for somebody can sit back with a kind of a gaming controller and blow things up and very accurately, and it won't be long before those are attached to missiles as well. So there's so much that's happening, and Ukraine is really on top of developing the technology to not only defend against it, but they're also trying to develop that technology themselves so that they can be the first and be able to win. So there's just so much that's happening here, and I wish the world could really understand how important it is that Ukraine wins this war.
Why? Why is it so important that Ukraine win the war?
Because there's so much to preserve. There's so much that's happening here, and so much a wealth of knowledge. As soon as the thing that they've done in all the occupied areas is the first thing the Russians do is make sure that nobody's speaking Russian. Teachers are jailed or killed.
No one's speaking Ukrainian.
I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. No one's speaking Ukrainian. I'm sorry about that. And that anything having to do with Ukrainian history or Ukrainian culture is wiped out. And people, Ukrainian music is banned. Everything about the culture is completely eliminated. And this has happened time and again throughout history with different cultures. And these things are lost. Libraries are burned. Books are destroyed that have anything to do with Ukrainian anything. And to lose everything that is here would be horrible for humanity. And so it's so important. It not only that, but of course, there's beautiful, beautiful people here. There's so many good people and so many helpers, so many in the community. I kind of liken it to after 9/11 in the US, everybody came together and there was a sense of unity and common purpose. That's happening very much here. In that, there are so many good people who are out helping their communities. They're distributing food. They're checking on elderly people. They're risking their lives to evacuate people from red zones. There's so many, many good things that are happening, and those people are going to be the primary targets if Russia wins. And just the humanity that would be lost in the kindness and love is unbelievable. So yeah,
the president greeted Putin in Alaska and treated him like the president of a peer country, and talked about potential peace. Certainly people thought that there was going to have to be a territorial gift of some land to Russia that the United States would enforce upon Ukraine, that some of the territory that they've occupied, frankly, potentially even more, would be granted to Russia. What do
Mhm.
people think about that Alaska summit?
Nothing good. I mean, there's kind of people, when I say I'm American, and people kind of guess that from my language, there's always kind of this pause to see what else I say, and because they want to know if I'm supporting Trump in that or not. And once I say something about not supporting that, um, people talk quite a bit, and morale. It's really, really hurt morale among the troops, and also morale among the people at home waiting for them. Um, and that's a terrible thing. But the other thing is that I think in the West, and it's not just the U.S., but certainly the U.S. is guilty of it, our administration, is that we're trying to play nice with Putin, and we're thinking that we can just negotiate our way through that. And I think that's what Trump started off doing, was he thought maybe he could negotiate where Russia would keep Crimea and some of the territory that they've occupied right now. Well, all that is for him is a reward for invading Ukraine. So, and he's already said he's not going to stop. He's talked about going into Poland, and now we're seeing the drones that he's sending into other countries. He is not going to say, well, this was a nice, we can come to an agreement on this, and then we'll just stop and leave you alone. That's not how Putin works. That's not how Russia has ever worked. And it's not the negotiating style that we need to take. And I think we're trying to be too civil about it and too kind.
So, if the price of peace was that Ukraine had to give up territory, either what Russia currently occupies, Crimea and the swath in the east, or frankly even more than that, do you think do you think the Ukrainian people would accept that?
I don't know what Zelensky would say, but I have spoken to so many Ukrainians who say absolutely not, because, like I said, that's a reward for Putin. That's a
Even though they're tired, even though they've been fighting a war for three
mhm.
plus years, even though they probably have family members or relatives or people they know that have died at the front line and have been wounded, even though they've heard stories of rape and abduction and et cetera, et cetera. Their homes have been destroyed, their cities have been destroyed, their bridges have been destroyed, their country's been destroyed. Even all of that, you don't think they'll give up the territory if that meant peace?
I can't speak for everybody, but for the people I have spoken to, what they see that as is a reward. And it also, they see that as all these people died and sacrificed for nothing if we let Russia take over these territories. Um, and they also see that as Putin will never keep a ceasefire, a peace treaty. He's shown repeatedly that he doesn't care about peace treaties. What that would let him do at this point would be to regroup. I believe it's Donetsk. There's some areas that are kind of higher on the hill. The Ukraine is incredibly flat, but these areas are a little higher up. And all that would do is allow him to get a better military position so that he could regroup and then come back in and take more, because they don't believe that he's going to just stop if he has a peace treaty. He's never stopped before, so why would he stop now? And like I said, that would be a reward for invading Ukraine. And he's not normal. He's not he's in his administration is not rational in that way and civil in that way. It's not like he'll say, oh, well, this is great, we got some extra land and now we can go home and focus on our own people. He's not going to do that.
So this question was posed to your Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and his retort was, "Well, so what's the alternative? Like, is it going to be war forever? What do you think the alternative is if we don't have peace? If Ukraine doesn't agree to give up territory?" To Marco Rubio's question, what's the alternative?
Well, I think we're seeing European nations come together and really start to take a stand. And unfortunately, it kind of feels like things are going to have to get worse before they get better. But it's going to take everybody standing together against Putin to stop him. Because even if he was granted land here, he's not going to stop, and he's not going to just suddenly leave all these other countries alone and decide that he's not going to keep moving forward with his plan. So I guess the alternative would be to arm Ukraine enough that we can win. I say we because I'm here. I'm not Ukrainian, obviously, but to arm Ukraine enough to win. So even during the Biden administration, we only armed Ukraine enough to be defensive. We didn't arm Ukraine enough to actually win the war and, to be offensive and to strike Russia where it hurts so they would stop. I think that we need to do that. I think that's got to be the next step, is to provide the long range missiles that, and whether it's Europe that does it or the US that does it, it doesn't really matter, but they need the long range missiles to continue to strike, for example, the oil refineries that they're striking, because that's hurting Russia where it does hurt.
We get a lot of reports of these strikes against oil fields here in the West. Are they having an impact, do you think? Like, is that what your sense of things?
Definitely. And they're providing these gas shortages in Russia right now, and the people are actually feeling it. And until the people there actually feel the war, because they're really, they haven't really up to this point, until they actually feel the pinch of the war, it's not going to change anything. So, but striking Russia where it hurts is really, I think that's the only tactic that's going to work.
What a fascinating experience that you're having, and I think I look forward to reading this book. It's going to be amazing to hear the stories that you're writing about the people living their lives through a war. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with Amanda Christmann Larson in just 2 minutes. I'm going to ask her a little bit more about her comments about culture. I'm going to ask her about Ukraine versus Russia and how people have changed their lives. What a fascinating experience. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Amanda Christmann Larson with us tonight. She is a communications expert. She's worked in communications and writing, I think, for most of her career in the United States, writing for big law firms and others. And for the last little while, she's been traveling the world. And she's now on her second visit to Ukraine in Kyiv. The last one was in Lvov, to the western side of Ukraine. Now she's in Kyiv, and she's traveled recently to the southeast portion of Ukraine, to a town that is only 20 kilometers from the front. And she's writing a fiction book about what's going on. And I think it's going to be really interesting to capture the stories of the people. So I look forward to it. Amanda, I spent some time in Ukraine in 2007 to 2010 doing business. And so I wasn't traveling as widely as you and meeting as many people, but I did meet a whole bunch of people in business. And I got to a couple of cities outside of Kyiv. I was very surprised by how I really thought it was two cultures. Almost frankly, I'm from Montreal, almost like Montreal at times, where the English and French live side by side. There were a whole bunch of people that I met with in banks and consulting companies and law firms that spoke Russian, and others that spoke Ukrainian. I was touring Ukrainian Catholic churches and Russian Orthodox churches. People showed me buildings and art that was Russian, and literature and shows, performances in Kyiv that was Russian, and a whole bunch that were in Ukrainian. I really got this sense that it was a bilingual city and a bilingual country and a bicultural society. I did go to a town, Dniprodova. It's one of those ones that's got 26 letters in it in the east, and it was very Russian and very pro-Russian. That the city that I met, and I think in some of the elections and referenda and stuff like that, they voted heavily in that area to have more of an association with Russia. And I've got family that are from the West, which is very European and pro-European, and frankly was part of Poland at one point in time. And so, it was almost as if there were two different peoples within Ukraine, the people that were pro-Russian, the people that were pro-European or pro-Ukrainian. And then I started comparing it to, Canada's relationship with the United States and wondering what would happen if the United States ever attacked Canada. 1 in 4 Canadians has a blood relative in the United States. So there aren't as many Americans that have blood relatives in Canada, obviously, because we're, 1/10 the size. But there's a huge amount of Canadians that have got a relative in the United States, and I understand that statistic is the same in Ukraine. 1 in 4 Ukrainians has a blood relative in Russia, and when you talk about culture, there's a huge amount of culture from the United States that comes into Canada. Hollywood movies, TV shows, music, etc. Just like there's a huge amount of culture that comes from Russia into Ukraine. So I wondered, how could there be a war? How could there be so much hatred? How could there be so much killing? How could there be rape? How could there be abductions? How could this actually exist between two countries that are so close, so intermingled from a cultural standpoint, from a literature standpoint, from a history standpoint, from a job standpoint, from a banking standpoint, from a sports standpoint? Ukrainians used to serve on the Russian, well, I guess it was the USSR hockey team and soccer team and volleyball team and Olympics team.
Mm-hmm.
How has this happened? How has it affected people?
Yeah, so people talk about that quite a bit and talk about what things were like before the war, and actually before 2014, what things were like before then and what things were like after then, and even up until 2022. Because half of Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union for so long, there are some major ties to people's families. The border really kind of didn't exist in some ways. People crossed over and went shopping in Russia, or family members, or dated people, or got married to people from the other side of the border, and that happened a lot. It doesn't happen anymore. The people who I've talked to from those areas that are close to Russia and that were so tied to them before, even if so, language has been weaponized. Putin has said basically that because so many people speak Russian, then that's proof that they're really supposed to be part of Russia. But even about the language, people do not want to be part of Russia. And so much of that has happened because, and we'll go back to how can these horrible things happen in a minute, but so many horrible things have happened that now people feel very united as Ukrainians, regardless of the language they speak or regardless of their ties to Russia or whatever. There are people who left early on and maybe went to Russia, if they were very pro-Russia before, who went to Russia during the war, or in 2022. Or even 2014 on up, up until then. So the people who are very pro-Russia have pretty much left the country. There's not many at all who are pro-Russia at this point. And now people are very united as Ukrainians. But you ask how that could happen. And I don't think I would have had an answer for that had I not been American right now, because I see us right now as so incredibly divided, and everybody has people in their families who are, for the opposite side of politics. And part of it is, so much of it is actually information and who controls the information. So we're all in our information bubbles, even within our own families. And we're only getting one side of the story. And the propaganda that's out there is unbelievable. So when you see the rise of fascist type ideas and actions, because we're now very well into the actions part of that. When you see that happening in real time in your own country, it becomes so much easier to understand how it can happen here. Because, just like in the US, Putin controls so much of the media and so much of the messaging that's happening in Russia. So it's very easy for people to think one thing or another. I've even had people I know, who were friends, send me Russian propaganda as proof that that Ukraine should just succumb to Russia, and that Russia's just trying to protect itself, and horrible things like that. Like, you got to understand, this is propaganda. There is propaganda on both sides, just like there always is. But talking to people here and seeing what's really happening here, it is not true. The stuff that I'm hearing coming out of the Russian side of things. So when you're here and see it, it is just not true. And it's very, very clearly propaganda, but it works on so many people, especially if they don't hear the other side of things. And I think now more than ever, with the technology that we've got, we're siloed in the information that we hear. And it makes it easy to believe that you are on the right side of things, even when you're not.
Tell us, what's life like in Kyiv? You said it's 3.5 million people. When I was there, it was a beautiful city. The culture, as you mentioned, I went to the opera house on a regular basis. I went to music theater. I went to the Meninsky Palace, which was stunning, and all the Onion Dome churches. What's life like in Kyiv today?
Kyiv is an amazing city. I really, really love it. I've been to cities, many cities all over the world, and it really is. It's got so much great art. It's got so much of a fantastic nightlife. There's a curfew at midnight, so everything stops, of course, but people are out and when I say nightlife, I don't mean like big parties and stuff. I just mean that the community of people here is so cohesive, and people are just out walking on the streets, and everyone's got pets. There's so many pets here. It's unbelievable. People really love their animals here. But then there's music, there's buskers, and what's really funny too is some of the buskers are playing classical music, which is like not a normal thing for me, but I love it. But there's so much that's going on here all the time, and so much great business. And I got to speak on a panel, or not really a panel, but for a class for the International Institute of Management yesterday, and met so many business owners who are looking forward. They're planning for when the war ends. What are we going to do, and how are we going to strategize, and how do we prepare for that now? Because people have not stopped their lives, and it's fantastic. I don't know that many people I know. I mean, maybe they would have this kind of resilience. You just don't know until they're in the situation. But it's just really remarkable and inspirational to see.
Remarkable and inspirational in the middle of a war. Seriously?
Oh yeah, I think maybe more so because of the war, because war is kind of like a big spotlight, and it shines light on the darkest of humanity, but it also shines light on the brightest of humanity. And I'm seeing that so much, and I'm really so grateful to be in circles where I'm seeing the light so much, and seeing so many good people, and kindness, so much human kindness.
So you've talked about, resilience, you've talked about inspiration, you've talked about adaptability, you've talked about creativity. This is all because of the war?
I think these things were here before, but the war has amplified it all. It brings out the worst in people, and it brings out the best in people, and um, it's really neat to be in a place where the best in people is brought out. It's I kind of at a loss for words on how to describe it, but I just feel so grateful to be here, and so lucky, I guess is the word.
What do you think is going to happen? You know the United States, and you know
I don't
the
know.
fractures within the United States. Well, it sounds like you're still in touch with your family and friends in St. Louis,
Yeah.
and you described it as being very divided today.
Mhm.
You've traveled the world, and so you've met people from lots of other countries, and you probably therefore have a better sense than a lot of us about how real people are thinking in a whole bunch of different parts in the world. And now you're in Ukraine, and you get a sense of their resilience and their attitudes toward peace or attitudes toward giving up territory. What do you
Mhm.
think is actually going to happen? What's the next couple of years going to play out as?
I think there is a sense, I mean, there are three different possibilities of what could happen. One possibility is that, the war could end and everything would be fine and we all return back to normal. I don't know that that's going to happen. I don't know that many people think that's going to happen, because Europe is mobilizing. I think we're building towards something bigger, bigger than Ukraine, and it's terrifying. I mean, it's in the world. There aren't many places that are going to be exempt from the outcome of whatever happens here.
So you're really worried about expansion beyond Ukraine into Poland,
Mhm.
into Moldova, into Eastern Europe, into the Baltics, etc. You're worried about that. You really think
Yeah,
that's a possibility?
I think it's a very real possibility. And I think that because I'm told that all the time. And if you look at what's happening, the European response, and also the provocation that Europeans are getting, it's very concerning. When you say, you use the phrase, well, you know the United States. I don't know the United States anymore because I don't think anybody knows. Maybe I don't even know if his inner circle knows. I don't think anybody knows what Trump is going to decide because he's wavered so much back and forth, and we just don't know what the United States involvement is. But we do see that the United States, or I'm sorry, that Europe and Canada and so many other countries are starting to form new alliances without the United States' role. And we also see that Russia is forming alliances with China and India and Iran and North Korea and these other countries. So we're seeing this whole shift of power that's, I just feel like nothing good is going to come out of this, at least not for the short term. And it's very, very, very concerning. And really,
So
the whole world should be watching.
You said there were three scenarios. One is we go back and everything's fine. The second is things get a lot worse. What's the third?
The third is that things also get a lot worse, but that we're somehow able to avoid war. When I say worse, I mean
An escalation into Eastern
an
Europe.
escalation. Yeah, I mean an escalation where maybe it doesn't, or maybe it isn't quite as, maybe it doesn't become the next World War. I hope it doesn't. I really, really hope it doesn't. But, even 2 years ago when I came here, the messaging was we have to make sure Ukraine wins because it's not going to stop with Ukraine. And my message at the time was because we were NATO members, if it doesn't stop with Ukraine, it's going into NATO countries, and then it's going to be my children and everyone else's children I know who are going to be the ones who are fighting. So we could either win it in Ukraine, 2 years ago I said, we could either win it in Ukraine now, or it's going to be us who are involved in it later. And that's changing so much because, is the US going to support NATO? We don't even know that. It's a scary thing to not know who your allies are and to be alienating so many of them. So, there's it's a very political conversation, I know, but the reality is that there's so much uncertainty right now that we just don't know. But we do know that this is it's not just about Ukraine. It's about worldwide what's going to happen next.
It's about worldwide what's going to happen next. Very profound statements. We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everyone. Interesting conversation with Amanda Christmann Larson. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Amanda Christmann Larson with us tonight. She is a fascinating individual. She's a mother and a grandmother, and a communications expert from St. Louis, Missouri. She's been traveling the world in a unbelievably interesting life for the last couple of years, where she's traveled throughout the world, and maybe she can tell us a little bit about that. I've done an interview with her before about her experiences. And right now she's in Kyiv, Ukraine. She's traveled previously to the west, to Lvov. And then during this trip, she's traveled to within 20 kilometers of the front line. She's writing a fiction book about her experiences. And she's worked for some not-for-profits in Ukraine. Amanda, this is Thanksgiving this weekend in Canada. Given your experience and given what's going on in the United States and what's going on in the world and what's going on in Ukraine and what's going on in the Middle East, given your travels around the world and the people that you've met, are you thankful and do you have gratitude like we're supposed to with Thanksgiving? Are you optimistic, or are you pessimistic that we're going to have World War III and things are getting far worse and we're fractured and we're polarized and we're partisan and we're fracturing into different spheres of influence in the world? Tell me what your attitude is. You've experienced the world more than anyone I know in the last couple of years.
I would say I am incredibly thankful. I think we all have so much to be thankful for, and it's in the micro moments. It's in our personal relationships with each other. It's in our connections with each other. For me, traveling the world, it's been in my connections with thousands of people from all over the world, and seeing that there is good everywhere. So in that way, I'm incredibly optimistic. I think as human beings, there's far more good than we give ourselves credit for. In that if we look, we can find it. So that's That's my very optimistic view. My pessimistic view is that I'm very concerned, and I think it would be unrealistic to not be concerned about what's happening right now worldwide, in my own country, and certainly here and throughout Europe and so many other places, and in Canada. We're really at a crossroads, and we have to decide what's going to happen next. And I feel in some ways that as regular people, and not as people in, with any kind of real power, that we don't have a lot of control over that. And I feel like we're kind of being used as pawns in different in these power plays that have very little to do with us. There's technology that's really concerning, but it's also very hopeful that, maybe it's the technology that will overcome all this. So I think all we can control is, like the Dalai Lama says, is what's right in front of us and in our own sphere of influence. And if we choose to do the good and be the good, I think that's where humanity and that's where happiness lies. And I think that's the power that every single one of us has. So, whether it's being kind to somebody in line at the grocery store, or volunteering for something, or, making a bigger difference, whatever your sphere of influence is just to be the light. Because I believe we said this last time I talked to you, light always overcomes the darkness. Darkness doesn't overcome light. So all you have to do is shine a light in the dark. And that's the thing that really, makes a difference and matters. And that's what we all have to be right now, regardless of what's happening in the world and regardless what politics throw at us.
Amanda, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for sharing with us a little bit of your experiences, both in Ukraine and around the world, and your perspective on resilience, on adaptability, on creativity, on shining the light. Light always overcomes darkness, and I love the line that you said about do good and be the good in the world. I'm thankful for you. Really appreciate it. You're an inspiration. One last question. I got to ask you, you're a mom, you're a grandmother, you were a communications executive from St. Louis, Missouri. What do your family and friends think about your travels around the world and going to within 20 kilometers of the front line in Ukraine? They think you're crazy or you're brilliant?
Yeah. So my kids have now gotten to the thing where they aren't thrilled that I'm doing this, but they also say mom's going to do what she's going to do. And I think they just know that unfortunately, take it or leave it, this is who I am and it's what I'm going to do. So I'm grateful for their support in that way, that they're just like, well, whatever you want to do, we'll still love you. So that's something else to be thankful for in my life.
That's for sure something to be thankful. Mom's going to do what she's going to do. Amanda Christmann Larson, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You actually can stream me online from Ukraine at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos go up on my website, briancrombie.com, on my YouTube video channel, on podcast servers, on social media, as soon as the radio show gets broadcast there. Thanks, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving.